Every year, my family and I celebrate the minor Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. We just love it so. The lighting of the menorah, the playing of the dreidel, the eating of the latkes, the time in celebration together. Hanukkah is always a time of celebration. But what is it that we are celebrating exactly? Now, the story behind Hanukkah that we Jews tell each other has to do about something that happened about 2,300 years ago. My, that's a long time ago. What was happening then that was worth celebrating? At that time, Israel, what we know as Israel, was surrounded and even taken over by some great and minor empires. The great empire at the time near them was the ancient Greek Empire, and the minor one was a kind of vassal Greek empire, or kind of a sibling Greek empire based in Syria. And in this case, the Syrian Empire kind of oversaw Israel for the Greeks. That means that those people in Syria got to say who was in charge, and they got kind of tributes or gifts from the Israelites every year. Now, the Syrians understood something that was very helpful, which was when people get to celebrate their culture in their own authentic and true way, things go more peacefully. And so the Syrians allow the Israelites to do that. But something happened among the Israelite people. The draw to the imperial cultures was strong. And so there became this great divide between the Israelites. Those who wanted to follow their traditional way, to retain their kind of Egyptian culture, to continue to speak in Assyrian, and those who said, let's speak Greek and let's adopt Greek names and let's govern ourselves as the Greeks do. And they began to not know each other as a single people. They began to think of their neighbors as other. And these lines of others not only had lines of religious practices, they also had lines of these cultural practices and lines that were economic in nature and all these things. And they began to think, who am I living with? And who will I claim as part of my people? Now, those who were Greek culture oriented actually wrote to the Syrians and said, why don't you step in? And why we're going to invite you to tell our kindred Israelite siblings who they should worship and how they should worship and what practices will be allowable. And so the Syrian emperor did. And it began to be a brutal time, a time of war. And in that time, those who were traditional Israelites felt really wronged and hurt and violated in their holy temple, the place where they knew their God Yahweh to reside, the place where the God Yahweh, who said, worship no idols, the imperial powers put a statue of the god Zeus. Yahweh said, my people should not eat pork. And yet the imperial forces tried to force Israelites to eat pork, literally push it in their mouths under the pain of death. They burned pork as an offering to Zeus in this temple. It was a time when we say it's a desecration, a ruining or spoiling of that which we know is sacred. It was also the moment when the Israelites began to really claim their identity and say, we are Jews. For the first time, they said, we are Jews, and we will be authentically Jewish. And so that desire to be authentically Jewish sparked a revolution. And It was led by a family of brothers called the Maccabees, and it was successful. For the first time, I think in over 1,000 years, the Jewish people, the Israelites, had their own kingdom again. They began to set their own laws, and they could practice the way they wanted to, and they got to decide for themselves. But before they could do any of that, they said, we need to make our temple sacred again. They consulted their priests, or what we would call ministers, and they said, how do we make our temple sacred again? And the answer was to burn pure olive oil, which takes 8 days to make. Because they'd been in a period of war, no one had been making this sacred oil. But they discovered deep in a storehouse one little bottle that contained one night's worth. But they said, our commandment is to continue to burn this sacred fire, to light the fires of purification, and to keep them endlessly burning. But we only have one night, and it'll take 8 nights to produce more olive oil. And the decision came, they could not wait. They could not pause. They could not hold off in living their values. They had to make things right again by what they knew was true. And so, having only one night's worth of oil, they lit the lamps anyway and watched the flame reborn. I imagine they stayed by that light, so precious and renewing it was for them. And they watched it burn and burn and burn. In fact, they said there was a miracle that it burned the full 8 nights needed until new olive oil was ready. But I imagine while they were waiting, while they were receiving that miraculous generosity of the continuous burning flame, that they were looking by that light at the ruins around them and wondering, how can we never face this level of desolation again? How can we make peace, not war? How can we keep what is sacred whole? And those questions led them to other questions. How did we grow so far apart from our people? How can we make peace not only amongst ourselves, but across the lands? How can we stay true to ourselves and understand that other people need to stay true to their selves? The 8 days of watching by that flame, that stillness was a time of contemplation and a kind of wisdom path. In this time of stillness for us, I hope we contemplate questions that allow us to come more together, that allow us to discover fuller truths, that allow us to await and be watchful for the lights that guide us. May you know wisdom these days. Happy Hanukkah.